5 nomad lessons that will save you a lot of time and money. And I was thinking about the most impactful lessons that I can share with you, and here they are. So if you want to be more successful, if you want to get more out of your nomad journey, if you want to create more money, if you want to have better experiences, if you want all those things, then these 5 lessons are a mandatory watch. First, never burn good relationships. I know this goes without saying, but don't be surprised. I mean, this happens all over the place. I've seen this happening so many times. In fact, it happened to me when I was much younger than I'm now, especially in my late teens, early 20s. A lot of things went wrong for a lot of different reasons. Oftentimes when people are young, they're very emotional and they don't really consider a lot of stuff. Now just think about the amount of energy it takes you to create a good relationship. We're talking about hundreds, potentially thousands of hours. Meeting people in person, right? Texting, working together, hanging out, going on vacations together, going to workshops, going to co-working spaces, wherever you guys are hanging out at. It takes so much time to do that, and oftentimes it's just one little insignificant detail that can ruin that relationship where you spend hundreds or thousands of hours to create that relationship in the first place. This is something you want to avoid at all costs, because a good relationship is never worth burning. Now, don't get me wrong, I would say that 95% of the people who you know, or I would say 95% of the people who you meet, typically don't contribute to your success. They don't contribute to whatever it is you're trying to master. And this is also important to note, right? So you don't want to spend all of your time with the people who don't add any value to your life. However, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't add any value to their lives. In fact, you should. Anything in life, business, relationships, friendships, must be, okay? And I'm saying must because it is not optional, it is a must. Must be based on give and take. If it's just one-sided, if you're only taking from that person, or if that person is only taking from you, then this usually never works out. In the long term, it never works out, or there is resentment, or you are just being fake, or they are being fake. All kinds of things happen. And I can give you a number of examples of good friends who I was able to maintain because of discipline, self-control, not crossing the red line. And in friendships, red lines exist very well. They exist in relationships, they exist in friendships. Red lines are in place everywhere, and you cannot cross certain red lines. Like if a good friend of yours needs emotional support, then you want to give that emotional support. If someone's going through a difficult time and you don't have time to give them, you don't have attention to give them, you don't nourish them. If you don't nourish them during one of the hardest times they're undergoing in their lives, they can count on you. And this is one of the most important aspects of a successful friendship, is the bond. It's the trust. And the trust is predicated on both of you giving during times where one of you is suffering or both of you are suffering. And so you want to be really mindful about that. And oftentimes we don't consider that. We get so occupied with something and we're like, oh, I don't have now 15 minutes time to talk to this person real quick to make sure that he or she feels better. We don't give people the time, and this is usually a huge mistake. Don't do it. If it's a bad relationship, then it's a different story, because a bad relationship is not worth continuing anyway. If it's a relationship that's based on greed, if it's an unbalanced relationship, those relationships are typically not worth pursuing. But we're not talking about balanced relationships where both parties contribute equally. And that doesn't have to be money, when we're talking about love. That can be in different ways. But if both people give 100%, if they give the best that they can give, then both people deserve the best intentions and they deserve the best attentions and they deserve the best outcomes, right? But in order to get that, you really have to be 100% committed at every possible level. And if you can do that, you have a very, very high chance to make this work. And this is really important. So I can't stress this enough. And I just want to talk very briefly about myself. I've met people at the most random places possible. Let me give you an example. I was playing tennis in Vietnam, and that's where I met my friend Tom. Now he is an advisor of Nomad Elite. That's where I met him. It was just random. I played tennis, he played tennis, and we randomly met at that tennis court. So oftentimes you meet people through passions you meet people through common interests, right? You meet people at networking events, you meet people, in certain, like groups or communities. There are different places where you can meet people. And, think about how much time I spent on that relationship, making it work and giving it 100% and just also getting 100% from him, it's been one of the best relationships, talking about friendships, that I've had. And that I still have. And there are another few examples. Certain people I met through crypto. Great, we met on an online forum or like a Telegram group, and then it happens, we're in the same city. I'm like, hey, that's awesome. Let's go for coffee and let's talk crypto, fantastic. And so I met people through a lot of like really different places, and so can you. So please don't burn any relationships, especially with good people, because you're going to regret it, especially if you've already spent hundreds of hours and thousands of hours. It's not worth it. And you need to understand that relationships have highs and lows. Friendships, they have highs and lows. Don't expect everything to be perfect at all times, because it's an illusion, it's a fantasy, it doesn't exist. Everything has highs and lows. The stock market has highs and lows. On a personal performance basis, you have highs and lows for different reasons. Nobody is 1000% good at all times. Nobody has a perfect day every single day. That just doesn't exist. And friendships too, they have highs and lows, and it's how you deal with the lows that ultimately decide whether that relationship will last or not. Another very important lesson is to never lose money. And this goes back to Warren Buffett. Okay, he talks about this all the time, never lose money, never lose money. Make sure that rule number 2 follows rule number 1, which is to not lose money. I agree with this statement 100%. Okay, never ever lose money. In business, never lose money when you're investing, never lose money. If you are a nomad and you are wanting to succeed, you are wanting to reach the next level in your career, in your nomad journey, then never ever lose money. This is so important, and yet so many people get it wrong. So many people gamble, so many people fantasize with their money, and that eventually they end up not having any money at all. And it takes a lot of work, time and energy, commitment, resources, everything to create money. And you'd be a fool to waste it all on something insignificant, something very pleasurable. It would be one of the worst mistakes that you can make. And oftentimes you see people, they're nomading and they're living in countries where they're practically paying 0 taxes and where the living costs are much lower than they are in their home countries, yet they don't manage to preserve any capital at all. And you sit here and you ask yourself, how the hell is that possible? Well, that is possible because that money is being distributed to certain areas that just don't need the money, or that don't deserve the money, like pleasure. A lot of money goes towards pleasure. A lot of money goes towards stupid things, pretty much, And very often we as nomads, we as digital entrepreneurs, we make these mistakes very early on in our 20s. And when we make these mistakes very early on in our 20s, oftentimes these mistakes, they carry on onto our 30s and sometimes even our 40s. So we want to be very mindful about everything that we do on a daily basis to make sure that our decisions are focused to help us create results for the long term. Because ultimately, your 20s and your 30s, that's your most productive time. That's when your energy is at the highest level. That's when you have really good cognitive ability. That's where everything is usually good. You're more positive. You haven't experienced too much bad stuff for you not to move ahead with certain things. Now, all of this is super important. And typically the 30s for a man is the best time ever, or for a woman, for everyone, is the best time ever. Why? You have a mix of experience and energy. In your 20s, you don't really have that much experience yet. Why? You haven't been around the block. You're still green behind your ears, right? You don't know much. But as soon as you get into your late 20s, your early 30s, things start changing. You start accumulating more experiences. You have built a good amount of, connections, and hopefully you have a decent network of people surrounding you who can help you with certain things, who add values that are different to yours. And likewise, you want to also contribute value to other people. And typically in your late 20s and early 30s, you have that. In your early 20s, mid 20s, oftentimes you don't have that because you haven't spent enough time. Everything is created through time. So make sure you don't make that mistake. Okay, never lose money, save as much as you can, preserve capital, invest. Ideally invest in things you understand, because that's what will make you more money. If you try being number 1 in crypto, if you are looking to be the best at marketing, if you're looking to be the best at sales, if you're looking to be the best entrepreneur, the best crypto investor, the best at real estate, well, guess what? You can really only be the best, the number 1 at maybe 1 given category, or maybe 2 given categories, but being the best at everything is practically impossible because it takes about 10,000 hours to master a skill. Let's be pragmatic here, okay? If you want to become an expert at something, it takes thousands of hours, and oftentimes it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. So if we just do the mathematics here, okay, 40 hours a week, which is, very conservative for an entrepreneur. You probably need more like 60 to 80 hours, just a matter of fact, and oftentimes even more than that. I'm not kidding, it takes a lot to be an entrepreneur. But let's say, you're putting in 200 hours a month. You're looking at maybe 2,500 hours a year, okay, that you have created in sweat equity, where you have created results, where you have created more skills, you have more experiences, you have more connections, you have more assets. And anything can be an asset, a web page, a YouTube channel, an email list, a social media profile. An employee is an asset. Everything is an asset, right? So if you can spend 2,500 hours a year, then after 4 years, you would have reached your goal with the 10,000 hours. And after 10,000 hours, you're probably an expert. And that takes a lot of time. And if you're spending less than 2,500 hours a year, it will take you much longer than that. Another big lesson is to know your weaknesses. This is a huge one. This is one of the biggest mistakes nomads make. In business and personal life, it's like so often we get into a new area where we feel like, oh, we know everything there is to know because we have watched a ton of YouTube videos on the subject. It couldn't be any further from the truth. Just because you've seen something on YouTube, just because you have seen someone demonstrate something on YouTube does not make it real for you. It does not mean that you have the experience. Well, you have the knowledge, it's obvious, but you don't necessarily have the experience until you have tried it yourself, until you have implemented it yourself. And oftentimes people overlook this completely. They go out there, they start investing in an area where they have gained theoretical knowledge just to figure out that, well, practical knowledge is also required to make this profitable. And this happens so many times, and they're trying so many different areas where they just don't have enough time to optimize their skills within these areas. And it's much better if you focus on one specific area. And like I said, you spend thousands of hours to create the results that you need for yourself, preserve, right, to create savings, create assets, networking, everything. You want to create that, and you can create that if your energy is spread thin across multiple projects. You can try this out for yourself. If you don't believe me, science, this is what I've learned. It pretty much tells me that in order for me to create results in a specific area, it takes most of my energy, okay, at a minimum 80%, okay? And sometimes it takes close to 100%, and that does not count the sleep, that does not count when you're out there doing sports, no. But when you're working, you've got to put the most energy that you have into something to create the result. If your energy is like 20% or 50%, you're just not going to make it. So my advice is to put as much energy into that specific area. And until you have created the result that you want for yourself, you don't budge. You don't budge, not an inch. And once you have created the results, and once you have reached a high level of experience and skill, then you can worry about doing other things. You can worry about getting into a new area. Then the sky is the limit. But until you have reached that high threshold, that high, skill, you better spend more and more time optimizing your skills and just making things happen, creating results, because there's so much competition. And just to add a few more points for the business, you can outsource certain skills. If you look at any successful entrepreneur running any successful company, they typically have people who are skilled at different areas. There's no entrepreneur, not even Elon Musk, who is perfect at every single area. So what do? They outsource it. They find partners who are good at different skills. They find managers who have good managerial skills. They find, operating officers like COOs, company operating officers. They find CEOs. They have all kinds of different people helping with the company. And so can you. And weaknesses, right? Let's say you go to a new country, you don't speak the language. Is this something you can outsource? Yes and no. You can outsource it in the sense that, well, you can have someone go to the supermarket with you and get some basic stuff done. Yeah, you can outsource that. You can prepare the list at home, have it like translated using a Google Translator, and then you're going to hand that list of groceries that you want to buy for yourself over to your assistant, and they can help you get those groceries. Because when you go to a supermarket in a new country, you're not even able to read the labels. Or when you're there looking for a product and you don't speak the language, you can't even approach a sales representative because you cannot ask the question. nobody speaks English, then you need someone to help you with that. So there's certain things you can outsource, meaning know your weaknesses, know how you can outsource those weaknesses. And oftentimes people would get a girlfriend, a wife to help them with certain tasks, or they would get, like I said, an assistant. Like, these are all very legitimate ways you can use them. However, you can only outsource so much. You cannot outsource everything. And you may not be able to have one person do everything because of a lot of different reasons, because they themselves may not have the skills for all these different areas, for all these different, like micro niches where you need help. So oftentimes, yes, know your weaknesses, but also know who to hire and how to outsource it. And potentially you can do some of these tasks yourself. If you feel like you have sufficient skills, sufficient language skills, then you can do it. However, know your weaknesses, know what they are and how you can find talent to solve these weaknesses. And this also is about everything, okay? It's work, life, everything, so please do that. 4, don't underestimate the foreigner factor. What do I mean by that? Well, you going to a new country takes a lot of courage. It's risk. You're exposing yourself to a lot of risk, right? You're exposing yourself to a new environment that's potentially not dangerous, but unknown. It's an unknown environment, right? And so the foreigner factor is real. A lot of people believe that the foreigner factor doesn't matter until they get to the new country and they're like, hey, I had no idea that every person in Mexico is trying to rip me off. I had no idea that everyone in Vietnam is trying to rip me off. I had no idea that everyone in Nigeria is trying to rip me off. So oftentimes it's like people ignore these little details. They don't inform themselves prior to going to a new country, and that often leads to a lot of trouble because people often get information from YouTube. They get information from, certain places where they watch videos or they read articles, and it's all about sunshines and unicorns, but they don't actually have first-hand experience in that country. The best experience that you can have is first-hand experience. And now you might think, well, how can I get first-hand experience without having been in the country? Well, the answer is you cannot. So the best thing you can do is find trustworthy people who you can talk to, who are open about everything, the good stuff and the bad stuff, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because a lot of people are not. A lot of people are not open about everything because they don't want to, right? But if you find someone who is open about everything that's important about the country you're looking to visit, then you have found a gold mine, because that person can teach you about certain things you need to be aware of. For instance, where not to spend time at night, good neighborhoods, bad neighborhoods, who to talk to, maybe they're pickpockets, maybe there are tourist scams, all kinds of things happen in developing countries that you may not know about. And each developing country is different. Not all are the same, they're all different. So please consider this. This is more important than anything, because at the end of the day, you want to be as prepared as possible to avoid a lot of these pitfalls. It's better to have more information and not need it than to not have enough information and need it. Just think about that. And number 5, always be appreciative. This is a big one. Oftentimes we go to a new country and we think like, well, everything has to go our way, everything has to be perfect, or everything has to be like back home. This is one of the most delusional mindsets that we as nomads can have, because at the end of the day, a new country comes with a new environment, with a new culture, with a new language, with new people, with new perspectives, with everything, new nature, new foods, new challenges pretty much. And when you get to that new country believing that everything should be the same and you're not appreciative of what you actually get to experience in that country, and you're just looking for, perfection here and there, guess what? You're not going to be happy. So be appreciative of the people who you meet, be appreciative of the opportunities that you may encounter in that country, investment opportunities, networking opportunities, whatever it may be for you, learning about a new language, learning about a new country's culture, that's also exciting for many of us, and just be appreciative, approach it with an attitude of gratitude. Because when you're appreciative and when you set your expectations lower and you exceed them, you're going to be much happier than if you were to set your expectations higher and not reach them. Like, one of the worst things that you can do is set your expectations too high, because it's a pretty big threshold for you to meet. And oftentimes we're not going to be happy. You're not going to be happy. So just inform yourself before as much as you can, get as much information as possible, and be appreciative. The new country will be different than your home country. The people will act quite differently. There will be challenges, there will be surprises, but there will also be a lot of good moments in that new country. What is one of your biggest nomad lessons? We would love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you're not subscribed to this channel yet, hit that subscribe button now. As always, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for watching Nomad Elite, and we see you on the next video.